Before we hop into the video, guys, we are almost at 10,800. I try not to do these too often, but we're getting pretty close to the next 100 and inevitably 11,000. So if you guys are new to the channel, please subscribe. So if you guys have been following my channel for a while, or any other channel that might discuss Final Fantasy VII Remake, you guys know that the news has been pretty light for this game. We know we're supposed to be getting a lot of information come 2019, sometime after Kingdom Hearts 3 releases, which we are still waiting for, so we got a couple days left before that game comes out. But it turns out we actually had an interesting interview last year. It came out July 2018, and we're just now learning about it over here in the States because it's an interview that happened on a Japanese website. And clearly Japanese websites aren't very popular in America, so it takes a while to get over here and get translated. Well, it just got translated pretty recently. The website is wantedly.com. Going forward, there's probably going to be a lot more eyes here because this could be a potential source for more information for the remake. The interview was conducted by Aya Hirayama, I think is how you say that person's name, which is the head of the Human Resources Department, interviewing Shinichiro Biwa, who's the level planner for Business Division 1. So this interview gives us a good look at Square Enix's development process when it comes to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. We get a look at like the story progression a little bit, and them having to rebuild the world for 3D and action combat. The translations we're going to look at come from Hian on Lifestream.net, which of course is a great place for Final Fantasy VII information. I'll have it linked in the description below. Referring to the person being interviewed, he says, he talks a lot about having creative freedom and that the people on the team have the room to pursue their passion and have creative input on the work. He says, even despite it being a legacy title with a lot of immovable parts, if you have a good idea, you can walk up and make a proposal directly to the director. So this is really good information because, as he mentions, there's a lot of immovable parts. This is a remake of a very popular, very classic game that a lot of people like. So there's some things you just cannot change. But what he's saying here is if you have a good idea and it works within the narrative of this universe, this game, you might be able to get that into the game. You're not stuck with just strictly remaking the game from the ground up. You can add new stuff, which is kind of nice to know. He goes on to say that he speaks generally in a way that he thinks indicates a lot of work has been done, since when asked about naming some successes and failures of the project, he mentions having succeeded at creating levels with satisfying play the team felt satisfied with, for the locations he was in charge of. For a person to say this would indicate that gameplay systems are firmly in place, since it wouldn't be possible to determine whether to be satisfied with how gameplay works in the levels if systems were not properly implemented. So more or less, the levels this person worked on are pretty far along, if not near completion or completed, because for them to have satisfying gameplay, most of the things would have to be done. If the gameplay was shitty, the exploration was shitty, you probably wouldn't be that satisfied with those levels, right? There's an interesting spot where he basically says that while the current project is an RPG with action elements, while we have the freedom to create the field's levels, from a view of it being a complete action game, we cannot add action elements that do not match up with the original game or the world of Final Fantasy VII. It's not like there's an infinite amount of options to choose from. So more or less, this confirms that it is in fact an action RPG, which I guess some people weren't aware of or didn't know. I'm not really sure. I've kind of all known for like 4 years now it's an action RPG. I think most people did, but apparently some didn't. But this also tells us they're working hard on an action RPG system that relates back to the original game's like gameplay systems and also the lore of the original game. So this can mean a lot of things. We don't know exactly what it means. Systems from the original game coming over to an action RPG version of Final Fantasy VII. Things won't translate as well. They can't make it exactly like the original game though. It's got to be more up to date, more modern. So what this could mean, we know that materia is coming back. We know summons are back. Will they work the same? Who knows, man. But more or less, they're doing their best to make it feel like the original game, even though it's going to be a very different game. He expands on the above point by saying that even so, seemingly working off of the previous notion of the action elements being limited, that he was interested in creating a game where simply walking or maneuvering the environment is fun and interesting. The Japanese seems to compound into an idea that whereas the actual combat might not be that action-based, he as a level designer is interested in and feels as if he has succeeded at making environments that express other action elements. Our translator takes this to mean that while they see the actual action elements as they pertain to combat to be somewhat limited by the legacy of the older game and the lore, they see other ways of expressing active play through the use of the environments themselves, which might suggest things like free-running elements, climbing, platforming, etc. So this to me seems pretty damn obvious. It's one way of modernizing the game. You need more things to do. You can't just run around fighting enemies. There's got to be other things to do around the environments and the world. And I feel like we've already seen signs of some of this stuff with the 2015 gameplay trailer. We've seen Cloud like squeeze beside rubble, climb up under rubble, and I think we'll be able to traverse environments very differently from the original game, which was really just us walking around. We also know that there's going to be destructible environments, which could add to the action elements outside of combat. According to Tetsuya Nomura, who is the director of Final Fantasy VII Remake, he says map and object destruction will also happen, and there are part-based destruction elements like breaking the guard scorpion's legs. This is something I've been saying for a few years now, but just kind of picture somewhat Final Fantasy 15 in the Final Fantasy VII universe. They're probably going to play very similar. And lastly, with Heian's translations, he says he talks about the transition from 2D to 3D, saying that there's an entirely new dimension to the act of discovering things in the environment. While points of interest were obvious before, they may not be now, and so the environment are not just a matter of walking through, you now have to look around, search for things, explore with your eyes. So this again is pretty damn obvious. When you're stepping from 2D to 3D, things are going to be very, very different. Whereas before with Final Fantasy VII, you'd walk into an area, you know exactly where you got to go. You see the doorways, you see the chests, you see the key items you got to grab. You know what's going on because everything else is a painted background. Anything you have to interact with is going to stand out very, very much. Now things are different. It's a 3D world. It's open world essentially. You're not just going to see a chest sitting, in the distance. It's probably going to be hidden behind shit. You actually got to search for items and things now probably. This is absolutely a good thing. This should promote environmental searching and exploring the map, exploring the game. Hopefully there's a lot of things to find. Here we have another bit of the interview translated by Chib Noir on Lifestream.net that says, he says that because the story is already decided and the game has a linear progression story-wise, how to design a location depends on the battle scenarios to take part in it, from necessary character emotions and actions to how vertical the area must be, the events/set pieces that will take place in the area, etc. All are taken into consideration before creating the location. So this pretty much means that the remake is going to follow the initial game almost all the way. Like, there might be some deviations here and there, maybe to accommodate some stuff like Crisis Core before Crisis and other things that branch off from the initial game, but more or less, it's going to follow exactly what the initial game did. The other thing to take note of is him commenting on how vertical an area has to be, so this might mean we actually get, to scale-sized enemies. The weapon monsters didn't feel as big to me as they should, at least in combat, given that they're giant monsters that come out from inside the planet to protect it when it's in danger. Part of this is obviously the technology of the time, and also in a turn-based RPG, it didn't really matter if the enemies were that big. But now, with the remake, because they're working on verticality when it comes to combat in areas, maybe we actually get to scale-sized enemies, which would be very, very nice. During the planning phase of a location, they include all the elements that make up the game, such as scenario, actions, terrain type, and topography. The resources ordered for each location include everything from experts on bug stuff to character designers, scenario writers, cutscene directors, UI designers, and motion directors, even text for NPCs. Once all this is done, they of course can't just implement them arbitrarily. It is necessary to responsibly implement all the resources used, and of course there are always issues and shortcomings that will be visible here and there, so they promote revisions, and when they move forward to the next location, they keep in mind how can we improve even more on this one. For the above reasons, the amount of work constantly gets increased, but that is something that can't be helped/is inevitable, since that's exactly what allows them to achieve what they really want freely. Even when keeping the game's volume in mind, the amount of work that they have to do for each location seems as if you're making a game from zero, and because of that, there's a lot of enthusiasm. So that's kind of a lot of reading, but it all went together. But more or less, again, they're using stuff from the initial game. But if it does need to be changed to make more sense in this modern 3D version of Final Fantasy VII, they're willing to do that. They're willing to make revisions if it is necessary. This to me is a very welcome thing, because as much as I do want a modern version of Final Fantasy VII, I do want to see a little bit of new things. Maybe some new character dialogue, new events that happen, stuff like that. And the last thing to take note of, or at least that I found interesting from this translation, was that he says that the planning phase for all locations is already settled. They have already entered the building phase, and the locations are already taking shape and getting closer to how they have imagined them every day. Now this can be perceived as good or bad. It depends on how long it actually takes them to build a level, because if they're just now like, hey, all the level planning's done, okay, but that's to show the rest of the game you gotta make. But if they can make levels fast enough, it's not really that bad, I suppose. But this is also good information, because this means they're not at the stage of, do we want to add this location or that location anymore? No, it's all done. The game's planned out. Every location is already planned out. That's already decided at this point. And that was as of mid-2018. It's been half a year or more since then, so who knows how far along the game is at this point. And that's pretty much it for the video, my dudes. There might be other things of interest from this specific interview, but I feel like these two translators would have pointed out anything else that was relevant. It's kind of crazy to think that this interview went unnoticed for such a long time. We've had a large bit of info out there for the remake that we've been waiting on for such a long time, but we just didn't know about it. It's kind of nice to talk about something positive for this game for once. We're not talking about rumors or speculation or me complaining about the damn remake and the lack of information. We have actual large bit of information from somebody who's actually working on the game. Either way, as usual, I pass it off to you guys. What are your thoughts? Does this get you even more excited for the remake? Are you excited for more information later this year? And if you guys enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new, turn on notifications, follow me on Twitter at @the_David, and my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Give me forever for a while, give me forever for a while. Quit